Hi, and welcome to another video from the CTAD Clinic. My name is Dr. Mike Lloyd, I'm the Clinic Director. In today's video we're going to be looking at what's known as the Triad of Treatment. So often we think of this in terms of the phase treatment model, i.e. the initial phase of stabilisation, trauma exploration and integration. This is slightly different. This is actually more about the actual way that treatment is undertaken for people who are dissociative. And this underpins really what we do with complex trauma. It's trying to understand how to look at this phenomenon and being able to organise it in a way that is much more meaningful and can be worked with successfully within therapy. So this is definitely a therapy skill, but it's something that people need to be aware of in terms of the process of dissociation, how it results from trauma, and how to actually start achieving recovery in whatever way that may feel for any individual. So this is really targeted at anybody who's dissociative, because it doesn't really matter what the form of dissociation is. What we know is that dissociation is often triggered in any given moment as a result of overwhelming emotion. So something happens, an emotion takes place, and that triggers a dissociative event, and that can lead to a behaviour. So we have this kind of straight line between emotion and behaviour. And the speed at which dissociation takes place often prevents people being able to understand, notice, or even be aware that the dissociation is happening. And that's where we see the amnesia take place, because people just don't really have that sort of thoughtful perception of the process that's taking place. And for traumatized individuals, this is especially difficult because the capacity for thinking, the capacity for understanding, making sense of the environment reduces under stress for people that are highly traumatized, because they move from the sort of the emotion or the affect to the behavior much faster than the non-traumatized person would do. So there really isn't much of a gap. Just go straight from one to another. It's a straight line between these two things. That's not particularly helpful. And what that often means is that any emotion that takes place leads to a resulting behaviour that can be quite impulsive and unrestrained. So the behaviours can be off the chart considering the thing that took place, the event, the trigger that took place. And what can leave a person with is this absolute sense of shame and guilt or denial that the behaviour even took place, because there's no memory of it, there's no sort of thoughtfulness lined up to this. So the cognitive capacities for that individual are completely absent. Now, I'm using the term individual, but people can sort of use it in any way they want to do, sort of like multiple or systems. It doesn't really matter. I'm just using that for the sake of ease of being able to explain the concepts here. Ultimately, what we see is there's no regulation of emotion. So the emotion moves straight to behaviour and there's nothing in the way to be able to prevent that behaviour from taking place. So if we want to try and work with that escalation, what we have to do is introduce this other component, which is the triad. So we have a straight line on the base, let's say emotion going straight to behaviour. What we need to do is introduce this third component, which is the cognitive. That's the thoughtfulness, that's the ability to be able to see, perceive, understand, make sense of, interpret, analyse, all those sort of things. It's a very, very thoughtful process. It's extremely important, because without this straight line really leads people into a lot of difficulty and causes enormous problems in life. And often the chaos is because there's this lack of thoughtfulness. There's no regulation built into this. This is also something that's often seen within sort of personality type profiles. So maybe not even dissociative, but let's say the emotionally unstable personality or the borderline personality, something happens, they're triggered straight to a series of behaviours as a direct line, and there's nothing thoughtful built in. So that's the trauma playing itself out. And with dissociation, it manifests so much more, because it can lead to a shift in identity. It can lead to a dissociation, of depersonalization, of derealization, where the behavior then is resulting from the nature of the dissociative system that occurs within that internal world. So let's say a person with DID, Dissociative Identity Disorder, can have an emotion, it immediately triggers a switch, that switch leads to a series of behaviours and there's nothing in between, and then maybe there's amnesia, the person comes back and there's a whole load of things that they have to then deal with, and that's where the shame and the guilt and all of those things can come in, because the behaviours may have taken them in a direction that they didn't want to go in. So that's the really sort of the maladaptive, the unhelpful type of dissociation that takes place. What we want to do is introduce a gap in between the emotion and the behaviour to allow for thoughtfulness to take place. And that triad is extremely powerful. And in therapy, what we try and do is build up this cognitive skill, right? So we try and overlay a thoughtful process into this sequence so that the emotion, instead of going in a straight line to the behavior, the emotion kind of segues out in towards thoughtfulness. That thoughtfulness then leads to a behavior which may then become a chosen behavior. And this is what we talk about in therapy when we say there's a difference between reacting and responding. Reaction is an instinctive thing. It's that straight line between emotion and behavior, and responding is a broken triangle line. So it's you feel, you think, and then you do. And that's a much more powerful system, and that gives people the element of choice as to what takes place. It allows people ultimately, and I have seen this in therapy, and this is what I work towards with lots and lots of the patients that I see, to making a choice as to whether to dissociate or not. So a feeling is emerging, the person can notice the dissociative state arising in whatever form that might be, and they can then make a choice as to whether they just want to hold the ground and not allow that dissociative process to take place, or to allow it to play itself through because that might be the most helpful thing for them in that moment. But it becomes a choice. This might seem a million miles away from what people are experiencing in their own dissociative systems, but it is absolutely possible, but only by interjecting this cognitive ability, the noticing, the awareness, the sense of understanding what's going on, the interpreting of all of the systems, of all of the variables that are taking place, and then making choices based on what would be helpful, and learning to take control of that behavior is ultimately part of the goal of what we're trying to achieve in therapy. And it'll take away to a degree the sense of it wasn't me that did it, because often what we hear is people just having no sense of what the behavior is. So the amnesia, the dissociative shift, takes them away from their conscious sense of self. This makes understanding who a person is and how they work extremely difficult. And this identity, this missing construct, I suppose, this missing cog in the machine of who I am and how do I know what I'm doing and how do I know what choices I have in the world, because I'm not in control of these things. And that straight line between emotion and behavior is often what takes away any person's sense of their self, because they lack the ability to be in charge of their own movements and their own choices and their own thought processes. And all we're trying to do is slow everything down to allow for thoughtfulness to take place so that can be built into the system. And ultimately, that is what's going to help anybody towards recovery from trauma and from dissociation. So instead then of a person saying, I have no recollection of what I did, I can't take responsibility, I can't be in charge of this because it's not me choosing this process, it moves towards anyone being able to say, I feel something, how do I want to act as a result? Do I want to become angry? Do I allow myself to become sad? Do I need to avoid, or do I need to walk towards? Do I need to go and do something? Need to get up? Do I need to move? Do I need to allow my dissociation to go through, or do I need to sort of like block it, halt that process and stay grounded in the moment and just make sense of everything that's going on? Now, this is something that non-traumatized, non-dissociative people without any personality issues that are just essentially kind of okay take for granted, because we do this all the time. We are highly regulated people, and traumatized dissociative people are essentially often unregulated people, and the introduction of the cognition into that triangle, what it does is it layers a foundation to be able to have regulation of all of these systems taking place, and that's an extremely powerful thing to move towards. So it's sort of one of those like hopeful things in advance. This is what I'm working towards, this is what I'm trying to achieve, and this is ultimately what the goal of therapy is all about. So I hope that's been useful. Obviously the therapist is the one that starts building in the process of that. It's a truly individual process. It works differently for every single person. It's simply thinking about the essence of it is to introduce thoughtfulness at every single stage of the process to allow regulation to take place, because that regulation then gives the element of choice, and that is what makes everything so very different. So So I hope this has been helpful. Please do all the usual stuff. Leave the comments in the section at the end of the video. Do all the liking, sharing and subscribing, all that stuff. That's really great. And look forward to making many more videos for you as we go along. And between now and the next one, please do take great care.